There's a recording that shouldn't exist, a voice that belonged to a dead man. And 50 years later, we're still not sure what we're hearing. This is Night Shift Stories, and tonight, we're going back to Enfield, to a house that hasn't been quiet in almost 50 years. In August 1977, something moved into 284 Green Street. Not a person, not an animal. Something that made furniture slide across floors on its own. Something that knocked on walls in patterns that couldn't be explained. Something that, eventually, learned to speak, and when it spoke, it used the voice of a man who died in that house. A man named Bill Wilkins. A man the family had never heard of. The Hodgson family was ordinary. A single mother, Peggy. 4 children. They'd moved into the council house on Green Street a few years earlier. Nothing unusual about them. Nothing unusual about the house. Until the night the knocking started. It started with shuffling sounds, like someone dragging furniture in the room above. Except no one was up there. The activity escalated quickly. Within days, beds were shaking. Chairs were flipping over. Objects flew across rooms when no one was near them. Janet Hodgson called the police. They came. And one officer watched a chair slide 4 feet across the floor on its own. Word spread. The press arrived. And then the investigators came. Maurice Grosse was a member of the Society for Psychical Research. He'd recently lost his daughter in a motorcycle accident. He was looking for answers of his own. He and fellow investigator Lyon Playfair would spend the next 18 months documenting the case, recording over 250 hours of audio evidence. They documented everything: furniture moving, toys flying, children being thrown from their beds. But the most disturbing evidence was still to come. In December 1977, something changed. An 11-year-old girl named Janet Hodgson began speaking in a voice that wasn't hers. The voice was deep, rasping. It sounded like an old man speaking through gravel. It came from her throat, but it didn't sound like a child. The voice claimed to have a name. Bill Wilkins. It said it had lived in this house. It said it had died here, in the corner, in a chair. Here's where it gets strange. Investigators looked into it, and they found that a man named Bill Wilkins had actually lived in that house. He'd died there, in that corner, of a brain hemorrhage. The Hodgsons had never heard of him. They'd moved in years after his death. There was no way Janet could have known his name, or how he died. The voice kept coming back, night after night. It answered questions. It described Bill's life. It described his death in detail that matched the records. Skeptics said Janet was faking it, that an 11-year-old girl could learn to speak in a deep voice using ventriloquism techniques. But investigators noticed something. When the voice spoke, Janet's lips barely moved. And when they filled her mouth with water, the voice continued anyway. The investigation went on for 18 months. The activity would surge, then fade, surge again, and through it all the recordings kept running. By September 1978, the activity had mostly stopped. The Hodgsons stayed in the house. Life went on. But the tapes remained. Over 250 hours of recordings sitting in archives. The case became legendary in paranormal circles. Books were written. Debates raged. But something got lost along the way. You see, Maurice Grosse didn't just record the voice. He played it on live radio during an LBC talk show sometime between 1977 and 1978. For decades, this broadcast was forgotten. The recording sat somewhere in some archive while the world moved on. Until October 2024. That's when the BBC's Haunting series revealed something remarkable. The LBC broadcast had been found. The Bill Wilkins voice on live radio existed. Think about that for a moment. This wasn't just a recording made in private. This voice was broadcast to thousands of listeners in real time. If Janet Hodgson was faking, if this was all an elaborate hoax, Maurice Grosse put his reputation on the line by playing that tape live. The 2023 Apple TV Plus documentary revived interest in the case. The filmmakers recreated the Hodgson house in exact detail, and had actors lip-sync to the original audio recordings. The effect was unsettling. Watching modern actors mouth words recorded 50 years ago. Real voices from a real investigation playing to speakers on a constructed set. The documentary earned acclaim for its approach, but it also raised a question that nobody seems to be asking. What else is in those archives? Over 250 hours of recordings, the LBC broadcast, notes, documents, photographs. How much of this material has never been examined? Janet Hodgson, now Janet Winter, has spoken about the case publicly. She maintains that the events were real, that she didn't understand what was happening to her. She's admitted that some events were faked, that the children, exhausted and scared, sometimes staged phenomena when the real activity stopped. But the voice, she says the voice was real. Photographs exist showing Janet apparently bending spoons, staging levitation. These images have fueled skeptics for decades. But here's what those photographs can't explain. The voice that knew things it shouldn't have known, the voice that was broadcast to thousands. Maurice Grosse died in 2006. Lyon Playfair died in 2018. The original investigators are gone, but their recordings remain. The tapes, the files, the documentation of one of the most extensively studied hauntings in history, sitting in storage, waiting. The Enfield case has inspired major films. The Conjuring 2 brought the story to millions, but Hollywood focused on the spectacle, the flying furniture, the possession. The real evidence was always quieter, more disturbing in its specificity. A voice that knew a dead man's name, details about a death that happened years before, and now we know that voice was played on live radio, that it exists somewhere in an archive, captured in a format that predates digital manipulation by decades. If this case interests you, consider looking into the Society for Psychical Research archives. Some materials have been digitized, more remain unexplored. You might want to track down the 2023 Apple TV Plus documentary. It's the most comprehensive recent examination and uses original audio throughout. The LBC radio broadcast is the key. If you have access to British Broadcasting archives, this recording may still be locatable with enough research. Janet Hodgson, now Janet Winter, has given interviews. Her accounts are the only first-person testimonies still available from inside that house. The skeptical explanation has never been satisfying. An 11-year-old girl teaching herself ventriloquism, learning the name of a man who died before she was born. It doesn't add up, but the supernatural explanation is even harder to accept. A dead man's consciousness persisting in a house, speaking through a child. For 18 months. The Enfield case doesn't offer easy answers. It never has. What it offers is evidence. Hours and hours of recordings that can be listened to, analyzed, questioned. And somewhere in those recordings, or in a broadcasting archive nobody's checked, there's a voice. A voice that shouldn't exist. A voice that came back. If you're interested in these kinds of stories, hit subscribe. We cover cases like this every week. The ones that don't have easy endings. 2ND4, Green Street still stands. The house changed hands over the years. People live there now. Ordinary people, presumably with ordinary lives. But every so often, someone knocks on the door. A researcher. A journalist. Someone who's heard the recordings and wants to see where it happened. The house doesn't answer questions. Houses never do. But the recordings might. If someone takes the time to listen. Bill Wilkins was a real person who lived at 284 Green Street. He died there in the 1960s, in a chair in the corner, of a brain hemorrhage. An 11-year-old girl spoke in his voice. She described his death accurately. She named him before anyone told her who he was. And Maurice Grosse was so convinced by what he witnessed that he played the recording on live radio. For thousands of strangers to hear, that broadcast happened. It was real. The BBC confirmed it in 2024, nearly 50 years after the fact, which means somewhere, in some archive, in some forgotten storage room, the Bill Wilkins voice is waiting to be heard again. The question isn't whether the recording exists. It does. The question is what we hear when we listen to it. A child playing tricks? A grieving father's wishful thinking? Or something that shouldn't be possible? A voice reaching across the boundary of death? I don't have an answer for you. The Enfield case has never had a clean resolution. That's what makes it so disturbing. But the evidence is there, waiting. Hundreds of hours of recordings and a live radio broadcast that most people have forgotten existed. Somewhere in those tapes, Bill Wilkins is still speaking, still answering questions, still telling investigators how he died. In that corner, in that chair, the voice that came back. 50 years later, and we're still listening.